the draft. So we're going to go ahead and just dive straight into it, my guy. Wild card weekend. So all of the home teams, with the exception of the Buccaneers, won. So you did have a lot of these games were not good if you were trying to find competitive football. A lot of these games were multiple possession victories or multiple score victories, however you wish to word it. And so I'm glad we actually had a good game with the Commanders and Bucks. But I wanted to pass it over to you first, because one of the big things I like doing is seeing how these teams are doing to see what can the Cowboys learn from. Like, what is the central lesson to be learned? So what do you think, my guy? What is the one thing that you think the Cowboys could learn from what happened on Wild Card Weekend?
Play better defense. I mean, because like when you look at the favorites in these games, they all had impressive defensive performances. And that's what I think the difference was last year in the playoffs for the Cowboys, that their defense, it just did not show up last year. And also another thing I took away is just, you talked about it with the run games. I just feel like these teams are getting more smart when it comes to, hey, how do we complement our quarterback? Not saying that, hey, we pay our quarterback a lot of money, you shouldn't be the main attraction on the offense, because in most cases, except for Philly, that was pretty much the case. So, Lamar Jackson is interesting because he's in that same group with Dak Prescott from this standpoint. Both of them have been fantastic regular season quarterbacks. Lamar's been a better regular season quarterback than Dak, but both have been fantastic regular season quarterbacks. I think Dak's been a little better in the playoffs. I know that game the other night from Lamar was fantastic, so maybe that'll start to turn around. But I just find it, I don't think it's a coincidence that, I think Lamar is going to play his best playoff football when he has a guy like Derrick Henry next to him. Now, can the Cowboys get a guy like Derrick Henry? They might be able to in this draft if they draft Ashton Genty. But that's one thing I took away is just how teams taking the load off their quarterback and them having high levels of execution because of it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And also bounce off that, for those that didn't see the quote from Mike Johnson, Magic Johnson, as well as the other ownership group there, they were in the tunnel and they were talking about how it takes a new vision, it takes a good coach, a good quarterback, basically that collection to win and be a good organization. And I know when I heard that, I'm like, man, I really wish Jerry Jones was listening, because one of the big takeaways for me was that is one of the biggest things. We talk about how you win championships. Now, you can get to the playoffs having good players, but I think great to good organizations win championships. And the Cowboys, in my opinion, are not that. Why? Because they have an ownership group that handles the financial side of the business, handling your football operations. And on top of that, you're not willing to let your ego step aside so that you can have these guys do each one. Now, again, I'm not trying to say that Mike McCarthy's great. I'm not trying to say that Dak Prescott's all that. But what I am looking at is the way that these teams are constructed. They're able to run the ball and stop the run. And I know that this is a pretty niche stat and you can cherry pick, but if you watch the game and the flow of the game, you can see that, like, for example, the Philadelphia score 22-10. The Eagles were in control of that game from start to finish. I don't care what the score tells you. They were able to run the ball, dominate time of possession, and also prevent the Packers from really having explosive plays in the run game. That's where I feel like, to your point, that the Cowboys need to learn from that. And so I really think that, of course, we have one game today, and that is going to be the Rams versus the Vikings. So we'll see if that trend still upholds in that particular game. But as we saw from last year, or even the last couple times the Cowboys have made it to the playoffs, they have been unable to either stop the run and run the ball, sometimes in the same game situations against the 49ers and the Packers specifically. And that's a problem. And we'll talk about it later in the show if we think that one particular player in question can change that, or if we need to go in a different direction. But I was just going to make sure, was there anything else you had that came to mind with Wild Card Weekend? Because I know that those were the two main takeaways that I got.
Sorry about that. I got excited there. One thing that I want to bring up, and I want to bring up this because I have data on this on my phone. Well, it's not data; it's just looking at their former draft picks.
Mhm.
Um, I know there are a lot of Cowboys fans out there that look at the Commanders and say they're going to be a problem in the future. This is just the beginning of what they're going to do. And while I do give respect to that organization and the direction that they've gone in, because I think it's kind of crazy that a basketball guy can come in and literally implement his vision into that organization and Magic Johnson and it be successful. It's almost like you don't have to have some lengthy football experience to just see the thing that everybody sees, which is we need better direction. But that's besides the point. I get that the Commanders had a really good year this year. I get that their quarterback looks very promising. I would also say this. When you look at that football team, name me the young superstars on that team outside of the quarterback, who, by the way, we have to make sure, especially after that CJ Stroud thing this year, that this guy can put together consistent seasons and how high his ceiling actually is due to the fact that he was a 5-year player in college. But when you look at the Commanders' first-round draft picks over the past, I think 6 or 7 years, going back to 2019, Jaden Daniels looks like that's going to be a home run pick. Emmanuel Forbes, Jahan Dotson, Jamin Davis, Chase Young, Dwayne Haskins, rest in peace, and Montez Sweat. Like, this team has struck out a lot in the draft. Now, they do have some young players that I like. When you talk about, Mike Sanistrell, looks like he's going to be a very good player in this league. They have some young offensive linemen that you look at and say, hey, they could be something. But overall, just them as a football team, I'm not really worried about them going forward because, I still think that they have a little bit of a ways to go in terms of building their team. Now, when you look at a team like the Bengals, the year that they went on that run, you looked at them and said, hey, they can be a problem for years to come. Now, I know the last 2 seasons have been a little difficult here for them, but the reason why you said that is because, okay, they have a legit quarterback and they have a guy that he can throw the ball to who might be the best player at his position. And you also have a really good young player in T. Higgins on the other side. You look at Washington and you just don't see that. Like, you see Jaden Daniels, like I said, looks like he has a lot of promise. Terry McLaurin's a little bit older. De'Ami Brown, nice player, but is he a superstar? I don't think by any standards. So when I look at that team, I just look and I see, hey, I think that there's a lot of old players on that team. And yeah, they have this quarterback here who looks like he can be really good, but they still have to continue to team build here for me to say, hey, that's the Death Star of the division. We have to worry about them every single year. That's just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, we've seen this happen with Dan Quinn several times in his career where he starts out hot at a new place and then he fizzles out over time. Now, we will see if that happens there. But the one thing I will bring up, and I know Cowboys fans are going to hate that I'm bringing this up, is that if the Commanders beat the Lions this upcoming week in the divisional round, that will mean that the Dallas Cowboys are the last remaining team from the 1990s to not make it they'll be the last team to not make the NFC title game in this century, which is terrible, all things considered. So we'll see if it happens, but I digress. I think that one of the main things we want to get to is what we...
Oh, could I add one more thing to that, by the way?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Other team success is not going to push the Cowboys, guys. I just want you to know that.
Yeah.
The Cowboys look at themselves as they're above these teams, even though they're having the success. Why? Because when that valuation comes in, Jerry sees his team number one, and he looks at the rest of the owners, and he's like, yeah, what now? That's the way he looks at it. I'm not saying it's right. I don't think it's right at all. I want this team to have success on the football field. But I don't think other teams having success means anything to where the Cowboys say, hey, we have to move forward and actually act like a real football organization. Just my perspective.
No, exactly. And you're 110% correct. Even though if that ends up happening, they won't give a damn. So